long last. Sorry, we're having a little meeting back there. As far as weeks, this week we actually do have some updates to go. I'm sure as everyone's more than slightly aware, there's been a number of elections challenges filed after interpretation of essentially initial standing by the Elections Commission. This now then rolls over to CC to process through. We're aware of the challenges as they come in, and CC is active and ready to respond should that become necessary. Part of this is, of course, then will be a hearings process as all this moves along, if it moves along, pending the Elections Commission's decision. With that, I would say as a general principle is this would actually just be a normal case hearing. And the CC has wide range of an ability to, one, levy penalty and then also influence and change course of election. Does it seem fit? Most of that is broadly discretionary to the Constitutional Council, and so that will just be something to be aware of going forward. But again, CC is actively aware of these cases as they're being filed and has been in discussions as to what our response is. Do they move past the initial state of the Elections Commission's review? With that, I'll yield to questions.
The Chief Justice yields his time to questions. Are there any questions for the Chief Justice? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
We're now in line for a report from the Speaker of the Senate, Maura Hamilton. Speaker of the Senate, Maura Hamilton, you are recognized. Hi, guys. Thank you for sitting next to each other. That makes it a little bit easier on my eyes. I'm just going to jump right into it. I really, really hope that y'all read the pre-Senate email. I hope that y'all have looked at the legislation in advance. I did let you guys know very far in advance that we had a lot to do today, so hopefully we're all ready to jump right into that. I did just want to give you some more explanation about that Dear Colleague letter that I sent to you guys in our pre-Senate email last night. What that is essentially is a federal recommendation from the Department of Education. So this is nothing that has to do with the state of South Carolina. It's nothing that has to do with the University of South Carolina. This is a national standard that's going to any public institution in the country. And so basically the summed up point of this letter is that it specifically labels collegiate DEI activities as discriminatory against other races. And it did give higher education institutions 14 days to disband of all of these programs, things that are named like that at the same time. So while obviously we do not engage in any discriminatory processes as a Senate, keeping the name inclusion and equity in our student government codes, we just want to make sure that we're acting safely, that we want to make sure that we're abiding by all the rules and the guidelines that are set out for the university as a whole. And so per that letter, what would be smartest and safest for Student Senate would be to change that name to something else. I do believe that there is legislation that is coming from your fellow senators that's going to get introduced off the floor today. So specifics on the name change and what is getting changed would probably be better discussed in the legislative period rather than right now. And I also just want to emphasize the committee name may change, but the efforts that Inclusion and Equity has done in the past, like that is not changing. We're still working as the best as we possibly can to serve the student body in our highest capacity. And I really, really hope that you guys understand that. If you have any questions about that, like obviously you can ask me at the end of my report or we can speak privately later. I know it's a big and kind of confusing thing, so I want to make sure that everyone has the correct information and the right tools and resources that they need. Otherwise, thank you for all of that legislation. I think that if everything that's going to get run off the floor today gets adopted onto the calendar, we are going to review 22 pieces of legislation today, which is awesome. I need to go back in time and see if that's like a record. We also are going to be reviewing over 100 pieces of legislation, which, as I shared with you guys a few weeks back, the 115th Senate, they ended around 86, so we've substantially increased our legislative numbers since then, and I'm super proud of you guys. And then, as I mentioned before, also just please remember that when you get sworn in as a senator, one of your duties is that you're going to stay for the Senate session, and Senate is technically allowed to run until 8 p.m. So I would expect that if you didn't communicate with my staff beforehand, everyone in this room should be here till 8 p.m. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for my report, and I will yield my time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we are now in line for a report from the Student Body Treasurer. Treasurer Lykin, you are recognized.
Hi, everyone. As far as internal updates, we've used 94% of our internal budget, which is great, and over 90% of the initiative budget. So we're pretty much at the end there. As far as the update on vendors, my deputy press secretary, Kaylee Erler, is still working with different places around Columbia, trying to get them to register as vendors so that we as student government can request to use them without having to go through the reimbursement process. Hopefully we're about to get Domino's, so that's exciting. As far as external updates, we've used 60% of our external budget if everything passes today. And as a reminder, that budget is July to July, so we're pretty much on track there. We'll be sending reminders about the final days for spring submission and reimbursement deadlines pretty soon to organizations. Jacob Wisenant and Kaylee Erler ran the workshop last week. It went really well. Jacob is also in the process of working to make reimbursement tutorials for organizations. So he put together like a video that's getting approved by Matt Hines, and then hopefully we'll be able to include that in the acceptance email that organizations receive when they get funding allocations from us. We're also looking to make like a comprehensive guide on what kind of receipts they need to submit, et cetera, et cetera. Working on Garnet Gate updates and streamlining that. As far as reimbursement updates, as of today, we have 64 pending reimbursements that total over $97,000. That is 48 event reimbursement submissions and 16 travel. We have, to date, 32 approved that total over $59,000. So since January 29th, we have had 10 total submissions approved. And in those 10 submissions, that has been over $32,000 cumulative approved. So I think that's all, and with that, I yield my time to questions.
The treasurer yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the treasurer? Seeing none, thank you. We are now in line for a report from the student body vice president. Vice President Tax, you are recognized.
Hey everyone. So this week, Freshman Council obviously had their Spurs Up for Safety event. It's going on right now in the health. Why am I blanking on this? At Strom. Additionally, they have actually moved their event tonight to next week due to the rain, and they really want to do it outside because it is a fashion show. So they will be having a partnership with the community shop. They went to Goodwill and bought a lot of clothing items. So come out and see them. If you don't know how to tie a tie, they'll be doing stuff about that as well. And then they will also they're also working on their legacy project, and I'm communicating with the AVP of Agriculture to ensure that it all runs smoothly. I also wanted to kind of highlight our Small Business Sunday. It started this past week, went really well. We have another one coming up. And then as far as kind of what's coming up as well, I really wanted to hear from Senate about the relationship between Senate and the Vice President's branch. How was that relationship? What things can we fix? My team's currently working on all their transition documents, and I want to make sure that whoever comes next is well informed on how to best have a relationship with Senate. And with that, I yield my time to questions.
The student body vice president yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the vice president? Seeing none, thank you. Really fast, I forgot to include in my report 2 quick things. Number 1, food for thought is getting analyzed. I'm going to have results next Wednesday. I have a meeting about it on Friday. Number 2, it's codified in the codes that we award something called the Rempel Award. It's a committee made up of our lovely chairwoman of academics and then 2 people I appoint. You're going to hear about that in the special orders, but it is my clerk, Addison Thornton, and then Emma Cumby. So we are now in line for a report from the student body president. Historian Rotundo, you are recognized.
Hi, everyone. Patton and I have been working on his transition document. It's looking really good. We want to ensure that the next student body president is ready to go. Patton has been mainly spending much of his time preparing for a Board of Trustees meeting he has this Friday, where he will present on several topics. Keep a lookout for more requests from the IMF in the near future. Things will be happening quickly, given the short time that is left. And with that, I yield my time.
The historian yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. We are now in line for a report from the Elections Commission. Commissioner Duty, you are recognized.
All right, good evening, everyone. So as Chief Justice Buchmeyer mentioned, we are working closely with him to ensure that the violations are addressed in the proper manner within the codes. So we are actively working together with him and my commission as well as involved in that process as well as his. So we'll be working with him and any updates deemed pertinent to everybody will be shared publicly and any necessary details will also be shared publicly. So Other than that, tonight at 7 p.m. in the Russell House Ballroom is the debate. I know a lot of you guys probably won't be able to be there due to the volume of legislation tonight. However, I encourage you to stop by towards the end if you can. It's going to be a super enjoyable experience for the people involved and also the students watching, as well as me, who I get to moderate. I get the privilege of doing that, so I'm super excited. Aside from that, you can watch it. I believe it's going to be posted on YouTube afterwards, so if you're curious, you can watch it there. It's going to be live streamed on Facebook, so you can watch the VOD afterwards as well if you're curious about certain things that were said or like just what happened in general. Additionally, all executive candidates have been interviewed and by SGTV and the media, so they will probably have that live pretty soon. Just keep a lookout for all material coming out about elections. It's super exciting stuff to keep an eye on. Also tonight, we will hopefully be welcoming, to my knowledge, she was voted on favorably last week. We also be welcoming a new deputy commissioner, Zoe Mason Darnell. She's been an amazing volunteer at our table before, and she's been super eager to get on board with us and get started. So aside from that, elections open up next Tuesday at 9 a.m. If you guys know people that want to do write-in candidacy, please refer them to the email, the SAEC at mailbox@sc.edu, and I can get them the information that they need. So yeah, they open at 9 a.m. next Tuesday. They will close at 5 p.m. on Wednesday. They are open overnight. So keep a lookout for that. Everybody's going to be getting an email. So super exciting stuff. Aside from that, it's all the pertinent information for me. So I yield my time to questions.
The commissioner yields his time to questions. Are there any questions for the commissioner? Seeing none.
Thank
you. We are now in line for special orders of the Senate. Are there any letters, petitions, appointments, applications, or other? The clerk will now read.
A communication from the Office of the Student Body President concerning the removal of funds from the Executive Fund.
Received. Continuing on with the special orders of the Senate, are there any letters, petitions, appointments, applications, or other? The clerk will now read.
A communication from the Office of the Speaker of the Student Senate concerning the appointment of Addison Thornton and Emma Cumby
To the Rempel Committee.
to the Committee.
The question is of the confirmation of the nominees to the Richard Rempel Committee. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The nominees are confirmed. Continuing on with the special orders of the Senate, are there any letters, petitions, appointments, applications, or other? The clerk will now read. Seeing no more special orders of the Senate, we are now in the motion period. Is there a motion to suspend the rules to allow Zoe Mason Darnell to take her oath of office? Second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The rules are now suspended.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Zoe Mason Darnell,
Do solemnly pledge to faithfully execute
do solemnly pledge to faithfully execute
the office of Deputy Elections Commissioner,
the office of Deputy Elections Commissioner,
to abide by the student government Constitution and codes,
to abide by the student government Constitution and codes,
to uphold the Carolinian Creed,
to uphold the Carolinian Creed,
and to represent my constituents to the best of my ability.
and to represent my constituents to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to reinstate the rules? Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. Continuing on with the motion period, are there any motions on the floor at this time? Senator Miller. What is the legislation pertaining to? There's been a motion to add the legislation pertaining to the quantity of AEDs on our campus to the first reading calendar. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is now added to the first reading calendar and assigned the number 114. Senator Gruner. There's been a motion to add the bill pertaining to the Department of Inclusion and Equity to the first reading calendar. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is now added to the first reading calendar and given the number of 115. Senator Gruner. There's been a motion to add the bill pertaining to the Inclusion and Equity Committee of Freshman Council to the first reading calendar. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is added to the first reading calendar and given the number of 116. Senator Gruner. There's been a motion to add the bill pertaining to the responsibilities of the Health and Safety Committee of Senate to the first reading calendar. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is added to the first reading calendar and given the number of 117. Senator Gruner. There's been a motion to add the bill pertaining to the Inclusion and Equity Committee of Senate to the first reading calendar. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is now added to the first reading calendar and given the number of 118. Are there any other motions from the floor at this time? Senator Gettins. There's been a motion to table SBL 116, 84, and 85 indefinitely. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The pieces of legislation are now tabled indefinitely. Are there any other motions on the floor at this time? Seeing no more motions, is there a motion to dispense of this motion period? Is there a second? Without objection, so ordered. Is there a motion to suspend the rules for 5 seconds so I can add all that legislation to the drive? Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The rules are now suspended for 5 minutes. Make sure y'all are back in 5 minutes.
SBL 11698, sponsored by the Finance Committee, a recommendation to permit Finance Committee to allocate funds.
Chairman Wenzel, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
In the essence of time, all information on this is on the bill. So with that, I yield my time to questions.
Are there any questions for the chairman? Seeing none. Senator Matthews. There's been a motion to pass SBL 11698 by unanimous consent. Seeing no objections, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of the new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 11699, introduced by Senator Winters, a recommendation to develop an app for the Garnet Bites program.
Senator Winters, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hi, everyone. I'll try to keep this quick. So Garnet Bites is a new program on campus. It helps reduce food waste and also as a byproduct, food insecurity on campus. The way it works is that when student organizations have extra food from events or like resident hall events, people who sign up for the Garnet Bites program are notified via email right now about the leftovers and can come get those. So right now it's in the pilot stages, but around spring break, it's going to be released for anyone to sign up, students, faculty, staff. And so I'm recommending that an app is developed for the program. Other universities have developed apps for similar programs, and they've been really successful. I met with the Associate Director for Sustainability, and she said that from the pilot program, they learned that students are more likely to participate in Garnet Bites if they can easily find the event locations, are familiar with the space, and receive detailed alerts and notifications. So like adding a map to an application would be really helpful. And also a lot of students don't actually check their student emails, so an app would also be really helpful. And she also said that they tried a text messaging alert system, but it ultimately did not work. So yeah, with that, I yield to questions.
The senator yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the senator? Seeing no more questions, this legislation is now referred to the Student Life Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will read.
SBL 116-100, introduced by Senator Costello, a recommendation to provide daily access to fried chicken tenders across campus instead of a single Wednesday.
Senator Costello, you're recognized to speak on this legislation.
Good evening, everyone. My recommendation seeks to expand the tradition of Chicken Finger Wednesday to a daily offering across campus. Students have consistently expressed their desire for steady access to fried chicken, which many view as a reliable and soulful meal. By offering this popular food option every day, we can not only accommodate varying student schedules and dietary needs, but also ensure fair access for everyone on campus. This move is about reflecting our commitment to student satisfaction and demonstrating the university's flexibility in meeting the evolving demands of its community. By expanding the availability of chicken tenders, we can provide a dependable, nutritious option that supports academic and personal success for all students. I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Gettins. There's been a motion to adopt SBL 116-100 by unanimous consent. Seeing no objections, this legislation is now adopted. Yay. Wait, that's crazy. I never thought we were going to get there. That's so fun. Okay. Continuing on with the call of the new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-101, introduced by Senator Costello, a recommendation to uphold campus decorum as a foundation for academic and social excellence.
Senator Costello, you are once again recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hello again. This recommendation of mine seeks to establish clear standards for decorum within the university environment to ensure a more disciplined and respectful setting for students. It aims to highlight the importance of self-presentation as a reflection of commitment to academic rigor and personal responsibility by encouraging students to uphold certain expectations of conduct. My recommendation seeks to instill professionalism and mutual respect among the student body. It also addresses the fact that such standards can positively impact not only academic performance, but the overall campus atmosphere. My intention is not to impose unnecessary restrictions, but to empower students with the tools they need for success in their academic and professional futures. Additionally, my recommendation advocates for educating students on the connection between appearance and discipline, ensuring all students have the resources and knowledge to meet these expectations confidently and in good faith. Speaker, I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions for the senator? Senator Lapsley. There's been a motion to pass SBL 116-101 by unanimous consent. Right, there's been an objection. Are there any other questions for the senator? Senator Byer.
I haven't really spoken with anyone. The goal of my recommendation is just to suggest to the faculty, to the administration, that they ought to do something about this, and that's it. So,
Senator Hopkins.
I've talked with students, and I've found varying results among them.
Senator Miller.
I'm just hoping, hopefully it would be increasing standards. Like, there are certain items that offend some people that I've recognized and others have recognized as well. So yeah, it's just about making a more professional campus, and it would just be up to administration on how they would decide that.
Senator Greener.
I don't see it as like a restriction on what they do necessarily. I just think it would be something good to enshrine in the student code of conduct. And I mean, there's a precedent from other universities to do so. I don't know how exactly they would roll it out here, though.
Senator Lapsley. The entire question period, do you mean? Okay. There's been a motion to limit the question period to 1 minute. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Y'all have 60 seconds starting when someone can start a timer. Total. All right. Senator Anderson.
So no, there hasn't been any other implementation among the flagship schools, but they've done it at other campuses at USC. So I kind of referenced that in my legislation.
Senator Diapolito.
Is there a reason in your whereas clause that you target examples on men versus
I really didn't intend to target anyone specifically. It's kind of just a blanket statement, which I was trying to do.
Senator Iftikhar.
I would have to talk to the administration for them to decide on that. I wouldn't tell them specifically right now.
Senator Mozo. Yeah. You can answer the question, and that was the last one.
So I mentioned in my legislation to increase access to the Carolina Clothes Closet and other similar programs so that students could have access to these clothes.
Right. Seeing that the question period was limited, the legislation will now be referred to the Student Life Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-102, sponsored by Senator Pollock, a recommendation to assess the current general physical courses.
Senator Pollock, you are recognized.
Hey y'all, so this one is just a little recommendation to physics, because if anyone here has taken physics at USC, I've just heard a lot of bad things. Not saying that they're doing necessarily something in particular wrong, it's just a lot of students are complaining about it. I've heard a fair share because I want to say almost every STEM major has to take it at some point or another. So this is just kind of a broad recommendation for the university to look at the curriculum and kind of assess it. It's not saying like fix this, do that. It's just, hey, a lot of students are doing not so hot on exams and are pretty unhappy about it. I, for one, took physics at a different school, and I thought it was good, and then I come here and I've heard otherwise. So, yeah, it's just look at the physics, how like pretty much the first 2 physics classes, I'm pretty sure, are what most STEM majors have to take. To look at those, see what's going on, why so many people are struggling, and then like just make sure to kind of follow through with it so they don't just make a fix and then it doesn't do anything. So it's kind of just look at what's wrong, try to fix it, and then keep up with it until it's like solved. I yield to questions.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Academics Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-103, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, a bill to change Article 3, Section 13 to remove the requirement for the president of the university's signature on bills.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
So this is pretty self-explanatory. We're just removing the need for the president of the university's signature on bills. This is mainly because student government is its own entity to pass on recommendations or something that we want to, not recommendations, pass on bills that we want to put into the codes or things like that should be up to us. I yield my time to questions.
The chairwoman yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Spurgeon. I can point of information that there's no difference. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't want to falsely say that.
No, it's okay. People view things of student government as actions of student government. So, Senator Blanton.
Motion to table indefinitely.
There's been a motion to table SBL 116-103 indefinitely. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is tabled indefinitely.
Motion to move the legislation to the second contested reading calendar.
There's been a motion to move SBL 116-103 from tabled indefinitely to the second reading contested calendar. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? Can you clarify that question? When you motion to place it on the second reading contested calendar, that question implies that it would be removed from the table to do so. The ayes have it. The legislation is placed on the second contested calendar. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-104, sponsored by Chairman Doppolito, Chairman LaPenta, and Vice Chairman Miller, or Chairperson Miller, a bill to amend Section 1260 to prevent conflict of interest due to branch physician overlap.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
So the three of us kind of wrote this out just because it might be inferred that you can't serve in 2 branches at the same time, but it's not actually codified. This is just putting it in the codes, and that way we're ensuring that there's no conflicts of interest within student government that could possibly affect checks and balances. I yield my time to questions.
The chairwoman yields her time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Lapsley.
I think it's upon, hold on. I believe upon signing, 1 sec. I don't think we switched. Yeah, upon signing.
Point of information, I could be incorrect, but as far from my position as an executive, I do not believe that there is a member of our organization who is serving in 2 branches at the same time. Senator Windsor. I'm under the impression that she's no longer a member of freshman council.
She was.
Okay.
Does that count? I don't know.
I can't speak for freshman council, unfortunately, so.
I yield my.
Are there any other questions? Seeing no more questions, this legislation is now referred to the Judiciary Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SB 116-105, sponsored by Senators Cumby and Winters, a recommendation to establish supplemental instruction for all honors sections of supported courses.
Senators Cumby and Winters, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Okay, so this is just a recommendation to establish SI for all honors sections of supported courses. So if you go to sc.edu and go to the Student Success Center, there's a list of entry-level courses that are supported through SI. But these non-honors sections of these same courses are not guaranteed to have an SI. So this recommendation is basically recommending that these honors courses are at least considered to be given an SI.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so basically that includes like organic chemistry too. And I don't know about y'all, but I need
Yeah.
my SI. So just making sure everyone has access to that.
Yeah, Bio 101 honors, yep.
Yeah.
That would be great, yep.
Yield
Yield
questions.
The senators yield their time to questions. Are there any questions for the senators? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Academics Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-106, sponsored by Senator Anderson, a recommendation to add a featured organization section on Garnet Gate.
Okay, I'll keep it short and sweet. Essentially, this bill would just put a little section for featured organizations on the homepage of Garnet Gate. This would feature organizations that are actively recruiting or have events going on. That way, people who are looking to join organizations are able to find ones that are actively recruiting and accepting new members. And with that, I yield my time to questions.
The chairwoman yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the chairwoman? Senator Lyons.
It would be a rotating system based on like who would be recruiting at that time. So probably how it would work, I haven't talked to anyone about this, but what I envisioned there would just be a link on Garnet Gate. Let's say you're a business frat and you're going through recruitment, you can fill out the link and it would just be a little graphic. They put all the time under it, there's like featured events. So it would work the same way where like the featured events with their graphics are on there, same process, but just for organizations.
Any other questions? Senator Lapsley.
Not like exactly, but I've spoken to like a couple pre-professional organizations and a lot of them struggle to know when like recruitment dates are. The biggest way a lot of them do that are through following the Instagram or word of mouth, and if you're not following the Instagram or word of mouth, and then I've spoken to a couple of students that said when they tried to join like an organization, there's an A through Z list. If you've never been involved in an organization, that can be a little intimidating, so that would kind of help take the pressure off for that stuff.
Any other questions? Seeing no more questions, this legislation is now referred to the Student Life Committee. Continue on with the call of new legislation. The clerk will now read.
SBL 116-107, sponsored by Senators Pollock and Lyons, a recommendation to create create pathways alongside the Blossom Street Bridge.
The senators are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Ayo, so right along the bridge on Blossom, there is no way to walk from Park Place and Green Crossing, and I want to say Palmetto Compress, one of which Park Place is on-campus housing. You can't walk alongside the bridge. So if someone wanted to theoretically walk from like one of those apartments to Greek Village, which is right across the bridge, closer to campus, you would have to walk 22 minutes all the way down to, Green Street Bridge. It's kind of a long walk, kind of inconvenient. I know there's buses, but a lot of students have found other methods, which include just squeezing through a fence and walking the rails by themselves. It looks pretty bad. It's not really safe, so it's kind of just this recommendation is for the university to address it and possibly build a pathway there, making it safer and allowing more connection across campus. You have anything? I yield my time to questions.
The senators yield their time to questions. Are there any questions for the senators? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Health and Safety Committee. Continue on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-108, sponsored by Senator Miller, a recommendation to add AED locations to the interactive campus map found on sc.edu.
Senator Miller, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Okay, this is part of some research that I've been doing for a little over a year now with the Office of Environmental Health and Safety, just about how we stack up with AEDs compared to other SEC campuses. And we are one of, there are 9 SEC schools who include their AEDs on the interactive map, which for us would be on sc.edu. So this legislation is just encouraging that we do that so that everyone can have access to that. I know a lot of health students are trained on how to use an AED, but I personally am trained but don't know where they are. So if there was an emergency, I wouldn't be able to assist in that. With that, I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the senator? Senator Lapsley? There's been a motion to pass SBL 116-108 by unanimous consent. Seeing no objections, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-109, sponsored by Senator Miller, a recommendation to form a AED coordination committee within the Office of Environmental Health and Safety.
Senator Miller, you are once again recognized to speak on this legislation.
To go along with them being on the map, since we would be putting on the map, we would need to kind of bring together our university on how we are taking care of those, how we're managing them, maintenance, making sure that they're all up to date on their maintenance so that the ones that are on the map are actually usable. So this would put a physical committee together within the Office of Environmental and Health and Safety to just be in charge of that. So everyone within the university, faculty and such, would know who to contact whenever they have a question or a concern regarding the AED. They would also create a policy, which is something we do not have as a university, but a lot of other SEC universities do have. With that, I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the senator? Speaker Pro Tempore Byer. There's been a motion to appoint Senator Brash as Speaker Pro Tempore Byer's proxy. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The proxy is now appointed. Senator Byer. Granted. Are there any other questions for Senator Miller? Seeing no more questions, this legislation is now referred to the Health and Safety Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-110, sponsored by Senators Iftikhar and Hopkins, a recommendation to promote the Teaching with AI course.
And the senators are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Yep. So what this recommendation basically does is, because as students we all use AI, and it basically allows instructors to use the same resources. And I think it's only fair that if we use the open source resource, instructors should use it too. And what we're asking for is for professors to take an AI course that would allow them to better navigate the shifting landscapes. And this would also tie up very well with Senator Garvin's legislation, where we're putting pressure on instructors to grade material in a specific time frame, but we're not giving them the adequate resources. Right for now.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's just a new land of learning that we're all navigating, so we're trying to give professors the same opportunity because there's already a post-grad class that's encouraged for professors to take, and it's free for full-time postgraduate professors, so we're just trying to kind of even the playing field for undergrad professors as well. So, anything else? All right, we yield the remainder of our time to questions.
The senators yield their time to questions. Are there any questions for the senators? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Academics Committee. Continue on with the call of new legislation. The clerk will now read.
SBO 116-111, sponsored by Senator Pollock, a recommendation to increase student artwork across campus.
Senator Pollock, you are once again recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hey, yo. So I had this idea because last semester I had to go to Carolina Coliseum like twice a week. And on the way, I would always pass through what was the name of that? Jones. And if you walk through Jones, you notice that there's a lot of artwork and it looks cool. And then right after going through Jones, I would go through that tunnel to Darla Moore and the Coliseum, and it was just bland and ugly. So I thought, why not we increase students' opportunities to like express their school spirit and make some artwork, kind of beautify the school more, because it'll make the school look better. And then second, students will just have more opportunity to like expand their portfolio, say if they're art majors or something like that. And pretty much it's just giving each individual school like the recommendation to say, hey, if any student wants to make artwork, we'll provide like the school would provide the funding for like materials, which shouldn't really cost a lot, it's just paint. I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields his time to questions. Are there any questions for the senators? Senator Windsor.
Yeah, well, you know, just because there's graffiti, like that's not through the school. So if they did it through the school, it would have to like, it says in the thing that like the school would say what's appropriate. So that's up to their interpretation. So nothing like no graffiti. It would be just like school spirit artwork. And like, yeah, I get you're gonna have to cover up someone graffitiing, but it shouldn't take away from someone's ability to like express school spirit.
Are there any other questions? Senator Miller.
I haven't talked to anyone, but I don't know. I would just assume that it would be nice if they kept it up.
Senator Blanton.
Yeah. That was.
Are there any other questions? Senator Lapsley.
So like the materials would be paid for by the school, like kind of commissioning it. So the way I envision it would be students would, like the school could send out a thing, each individual college could send out a thing saying like, hey, if anyone wants to make artwork, students could like submit like what they would potentially want to make, and then the school would fund for the paint to paint a wall or whatever type of artwork they want to do, which typically paint's not expensive. So I don't think it would be like a huge burden.
Are there any other questions for the senator? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Student Life Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBO 116-112, sponsored by Senator Silker, a recommendation to require U101 classes to include student organization presentations in their curriculum.
Senator Silker, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hi guys, this is pretty simple. We know that U101 aims to bring leadership and really coordinate or really just bring campus and organizations to our freshmen that are interested and get them involved on campus. So I thought a great way to do that would be to have student organization leaders come in and present to U101 classes. It could be very short, like 5-minute little presentations from, say, the president of a professional fraternity or maybe something else. And I actually had a meeting with Katie Hopkins last Tuesday, the U101 curriculum coordinator, And she said that since this technically wouldn't be a change in curriculum, because a lot of curriculum is already leadership-based, this can start as soon as next fall because they already have a campus partners presentation process where campus partners such as the Student Success Center can submit their information, and then a U101 professor can pick them up. And she was very eager to have student organization leaders enter that same queue for next fall. And with that, I yield to questions.
The senator yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the senator? Senator Lapsley. There's been a motion to commit SBL 116-112 to powers and responsibilities. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is referred to the Powers and Responsibilities Committee. Are there any other questions for the senator? Seeing no more questions, this legislation is also referred to the Academics Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-113, sponsored by the Senate Inclusion and Equity Committee, a recommendation to the 117th Senate to host a semesterly summit that allows student leaders of multicultural organizations to connect and network.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
So this recommendation is really simple, and I'll go over it really fast. So Inclusion Equity is hosting a event next Tuesday that I think I mentioned during announcement time. But this event is just basically an opportunity for student leaders and multicultural orgs to come in and connect. So this kind of offers like a networking opportunity for these multicultural orgs, and it gives them a chance to make collective efforts on campus and work together to share any sort of initiatives that they would like to host together. And it's just an opportunity for student government to not only check in with these orgs and give them timely updates about what's happening in student government, but also it will give student government the chance to empower and encourage these orgs to build teamwork amongst themselves. And yeah, so do you guys want to add anything? Okay, and we yield our time to questions.
The sponsors yield their time to questions. Are there any questions? Senator Gettins. I can answer that. Point of information, this event has already been reviewed by university administration, and it's absolutely fine. Senator Lapsley.
It's a recommendation, so it's just like they can choose what they would or would not. My understanding of it when I looked at the codes is they can choose whether or not they would want to implement that.
Senator Lapsley.
It's February 25th.
So we're currently hosting one, and we're just recommending that this is something that continues even when we transition. I think we believe that orgs would benefit from a continued event like this, or like a routinely scheduled event like this.
Senator Lapsley.
Its application is mostly for the 117th Senate, so, but it still remains as a recommendation, so it will be up to the 117th to determine how they decide to go about the event.
Senator Lapsley. There's been a motion to, you mean unanimous consent? Okay. There's been a motion to pass SBL 116-113 by unanimous consent. Seeing no objections, this legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-114, sponsored by Senator Miller, a recommendation to increase the quantity of AEDs on campus.
Senator Miller, you are recognized to speak on this legislation.
This goes with the first two legislations. I had just forgot to add it. So it just is increasing the quantity of AEDs, and we are pretty low compared to some other SEC schools. We're third lowest in the SEC for the number of AEDs on our campus. Schools with like comparable enrollment numbers have over 120 AEDs, while we only have 70. So that's pretty big deficit, and we have actually it's been written before that we have used our AEDs in life-saving measures on campus before, so I think it would be beneficial for us to have more. With that, I yield my time to questions.
The senator yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the senator? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Health and Safety Committee. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBO 116-115, a bill to amend Section 1 to 120 of the Student Government Code.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
We came up with this legislation kind of in response to the Dear Colleagues letter. So the Inclusion and Equity Committee will have to change their name. So we came up with the Liberties and Representation Committee. This first piece just looks at Section 1 to 120 and changes the codes from Inclusion and Equity Committee to Liberties and Representations, wherever that was previously present, and redefines their goals a little bit to the rights and liberties and representations of all students, just to realign with the new name of the committee. And then down at the bottom, it was previously written that the Deputy Secretary of Disability Services was to report to the Inclusion and Equity Committee. We actually changed that to the Health and Safety Committee. Disability is currently being handled a little bit more by Health and Safety right now. So we just moved that in there, since that's not really something that would be a part of the new duties of the new Liberties and Representation Committee. With that, I yield my time to questions.
Are there any questions for the senators? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Judiciary, Powers and Responsibilities, and Inclusion and Equity Committees. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBO 116-116, a bill to amend Section 17100 of the Student Government Codes reflecting freshman council committees.
The sponsors are once again recognized to speak on this legislation.
Same thing, renaming. We had to go through all the sections of the code, so this one is just pertaining to freshman council, changing their Inclusion and Equity Committee to the Liberties and Representation Committee. With that, I yield my time to questions.
And point of information, the student body vice president as well as freshman council is aware of this bill. Are there any questions for the sponsors? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Judiciary, Powers and Responsibilities, and Inclusion and Equity Committees. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBO 116-117, a bill to amend the Student Government Codes to realign the goals of the Health and Safety Committee.
The sponsors are recognized to speak on this legislation.
Like I said before, we have been kind of taking over disability in health and safety's overview for this term. We are the ones that interview the Deputy Secretary of Disability, and additionally, a lot of the legislation that's gone through regarding disability has gone through the Health and Safety Committee, so we just thought it would be ideal to realign the codes and put that in there, that is in the Health and Safety Committee's jurisdiction. With that, I yield my time to questions.
The sponsors yield their time to questions. Are there any questions for the sponsors? Senator Blanton.
In the codes as well as sort of the manual that talks a little about it, it kind of spreads the terms across all three committees, and I think the verbiage was a little bit confusing. In terms of student life directly, I might need a point of information, does student life interview the Deputy Secretary of Disabilities the same way Health and Safety does?
Point of information, any nominees or legislation that's referred to committee is up to jurisdiction of the speaker. So I typically, over the past year, have been referring anything relating to disability rights or services to both student life and health and safety. Per the code, student life does have a very, very, very broad umbrella. Like, I'm pretty sure it just says pertaining to all aspects of student life. So that's just my interpretation personally. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, this legislation is referred to the Judiciary Powers and Responsibilities, Inclusion and Equity, and Student Life Committees. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 116-118, bill to amend Section 24120 of the Student Government Codes.
The sponsors are once again recognized to speak on this legislation.
Once again, just changing the Inclusion and Equity to Liberties and Representations Committee. This was the final place I saw it in the codes, and this would be pertaining to our actual committee within Senate. This just outlines their duties and changes any language that might be controversial. I yield my time to questions.
The sponsors yield their time to questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, this legislation is now referred to the Judiciary Powers and Responsibilities and Health and Safety Committees. Continuing on with the call of new legislation, the clerk will now read. I'd like to amend my previous statement. It's also referred to the Inclusion and Equity Committee. Hearing none, we are now on the call of the uncontested calendar. Do you guys need a minute to stretch your legs and use the restroom, or would you like to keep going? Okay, awesome. That's perfectly fine with me. We are now on the call of the uncontested calendar. The clerk will now read.
SBL 11695, introduced by Senators Wenzel, Matthews, Rojas, and Lyons, a bill to relax entry restrictions on programs.
The senators are now recognized to speak on this legislation.
Hello, everybody. This is a fairly simple tweak in the verbiage of the codes, but all it does is it essentially makes it opens the door for funding for more events that might be, I guess, happening within an organization, and would remove the requirement that the committee has usually had for these events to be advertised to students and to be generally more open. And all of that it is changing it to is that organizations must not restrict entry to other students for an event for our funding. I yield to questions, unless you guys have anything else you want to add. Okay, yield to questions.
The sponsors yield their time to questions. Are there any questions for the sponsors? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on this legislation. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This legislation is now adopted. Continuing on with the call of uncontested legislation, the clerk will now read.
SBL 11697, introduced by Senator Matthews, a bill to relax entry restrictions on programs.
Senator Matthews, you are once again recognized to speak on this legislation. I believe there was an incorrect title there. Can you amend 97? What's the title for that?
Okay, well, I guess we're up here again for the same bill. I repeat everything I just said. Any questions? I yield. Okay. Yes. Maybe.
It's the correct legislative number, just the incorrect title is listed. So SBL 11697, it was on the first reading calendar last week.
There was that second one about the comptrollers that Will sponsored.
Okay, so 97 was just passed by Senate. We need to review 95. That's what happened. A bill to enforce reasonable comptroller response times. Yeah, if the sponsors want to get up and speak again, they can.
We'll just make this really quick. It just says that comptrollers need to respond within 48 hours. With that, I yield my time to questions.
Are there any questions for the sponsors? Seeing none, we will now move to a voice vote on the legislation. To clarify, this is regarding response times for comptrollers. All those in favor of passage say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is now adopted. I want to triple check if there's a motion to revisit the vote on the legislation pertaining to entry restrictions. I would absolutely welcome it. Everyone's comfortable? Okay. Continue on with the call of the uncontested calendar. The clerk will now read. Hearing none, we are now on the call of the contested calendar. The clerk will now read.
SBL 116-103, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, a bill to change Article 3, Section 13, to remove the requirement for the president of the university's signature on bills.
The chairwoman is once again recognized to speak on this legislation.
So this recommendation was actually brought to us by the president of the university. It was his idea. He didn't want to sign any bills because he wanted to give us autonomy, give us the right to self-government. Also, this is a referendum, so if it were passed, it would have to be voted on by the entire student body, which means if it were passed, it would be on the ballot during elections. I yield my time to questions.
The chairwoman yields her time to questions. Are there any questions for the chairwoman? Senator Brash.
Most of what I have from him is that he wants to give us as much independence in a sense as a group and not be correlated with like the faculty and all of them, like to have our own independent ideas, and if we want to push this through, then we can push it through.
And point of information, the difference between the two things per our rules, codes, constitution, is that once the student body president signs a piece of legislation, it takes effect. The president of the university signing a piece of legislation makes it change from a bill to an act. There is no difference in the power of an act. It doesn't have any extra power. It just means that there's a different signature on it, or a secondary signature on it. Senator Blanton.
Yes, if it were on the elections ballot, yes.
Senator Brash.
$103.
It was in the first reading calendar originally, and then it was placed on the contested in the middle of the Senate session, so I couldn't move it for y'all. Are there any other questions for the senator? No more questions? Senator Matthews. I can answer this question. He has not signed a bill into an act once this year, and he did not do that last year as well. This new president has not at all.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for the senator? Seeing none, we will now move to a roll call vote on this legislation. The clerk will call the roll.
Lauren Anderson. Amanda Blanton. Bella Brash. Natalia Beyer. William Costello. Emma Cumby. Kiki Dapolito. Grant Dorsnowski. Nicholas Gavin. Amelia Gay. Caleb Geddens. Kaylee Goodrich. Aiden Gruner. Zoe Hopkins. Daniel Huang. Muhammad Iftikhar. Anita John.
Aye.
Lakika Cassetti.
Please make sure to speak up.
Mia LaPinta. Donnie Lapsley. Jeffrey Lyons. Jackson Matthews. Isabel Miller. Mackenzie Mozo. Bryson Peterson. Landon Pollock. Rodrigo Rojas. Taylor Silkert. Lucas Solomon. Amaya Sowell. Thomas Spurgeon. William Wenzel. Lawson Windsor. Marion Winters.
By a vote of 31 ayes to 3 nays, this legislation is now referred to the student body. So to clarify, this is not in effect, just now for students that are going to be voting in the elections next week on Wednesday, there's going to be an extra page, and they're all going to get to vote on a piece of Senate legislation, so yay. Okay, continuing on with the call of the contested legislation, the clerk will now read. Hearing none, we are now in line for a period of open discussion. Does any senator wish to bring a matter of attention to the body? Senator Lyons. Yeah. Are you going to make a motion to commit to a committee? Okay. All right. There's been a motion to commit SBL 116-110 to the Student Life Committee. Y'all got that? Okay. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The legislation is now additionally referred to the Student Life Committee. We are still in a period of open discussion. Does any senator wish to bring a matter of attention to the body? Okay, seeing none, we are now in a period of announcements. Does any senator wish to make an announcement to the body? Okay, seeing none, great work tonight. If you have any questions, please let me know, especially about the Dear Colleague letter. Please, please, please let me know. I want to make sure that there's no misinformation. I yield my time to the well, honestly. Is there a motion to adjourn? Without objection, the Senate will now stand adjourned until Wednesday, February 26, 2024. Please don't forget that Senate next week is also going to be long, if not longer.